Number 18 and the letter chet. Can you say that? Chet. Especially if you have a cold. It's easier. Chet. It's a Hebrew letter. Actually, and I'm going to get into that in a second because first I want to tell you not even a story. This is just a scene from my life. There is a nonprofit organization called Happy Bottoms. Yeah, heard of it? If you don't know it's about diapers, it might sound confusing what Happy Bottoms would be, but it's about diapers. So, collecting donations of diapers and buying diapers in order to distribute to those in need. Fantastic, wonderful organization. They're based out of Kansas City. And I was invited to their fundraising gala a couple of years ago. And as part of their fundraising, they had a wine poll, which I don't know if you guys have done this before, where they just have this whole wall full of wines that have been donated, but they're wrapped up so you can't tell what each one is. And they have numbers on them. So usually it's $20. So, they raise the money by people paying $20 then to sort of roll the dice and see which wine they pick out. And they might get like a Sutter Home or something that's worth, no, they're usually all decent wines. No shade against Sutter Home, I don't care. But, or you might get a $50 bottle of wine. And that's just kind of the fun of it. So I'm like, okay, I'll do this. And I put my 20 down and I said, how about number 54? And then I heard a voice of a lady behind me said, oh, shucks. And I'm like, what? Did I do something wrong? I was standing in line and there were people behind me. And this lady apparently wanted the number 54. I'm like, oh, I'm sorry. You can have it. I didn't know there was somebody here who really, really likes the number 54. It feels a little bit random. And she's like, oh, no, there's a 90 as well. I can take 90. So I'm like, well, now you must explain this to me. I can't. 54, 90. She said, oh, I'm Jewish. I'm like, keep going. I still don't understand. She's like, well, multiples of 18. Keep going. Still don't understand. And I had heard of this before, but I'd forgotten. And she reminded me that 18 is the number of life in Jewish thought. And there's a lot of fun numerology and really deep numerology in Judaism as well. And the biggest one is this number 18. And so if they can get something like a wine that's numbered 18, great. But if not, then multiples of 18. And maybe the lower the better. So she was really hoping for 54, but 90 was okay too. 18 is the number of life because the letters, there's two letters that make it up. And if you meet a Jewish person wearing a pendant, kind of like some of us will wear a cross, often that pendant will either be a Star of David or it'll be the word Chai, which is just the two letters, Chet and Yod. And it means life. And when you add the numbers of those letters up, just like we might have a code or a cipher where A is 1 and B is 2 and C is 3, there's a similar thing in Hebrew. And when they add the letters up for Chai, it adds up to 18. So 18 is the number of life, and this is a very important thing within Judaism. And this was recalled to my mind when I was reading the gospel for this morning. Because this is a beautifully written gospel. It has all of these patterns in it. And you'll notice that it mentions twice that this lady had been, it said crippled, the spirit had crippled her for 18 years. And then Jesus recalls that again at the end. A daughter of Abraham who Satan bound for 18 long years. And the Bible is not written in the way that we write stories today. Well, somebody will write a fairly simple story, but they can spend 500 or 600 pages on it as a novelist because we want all the details, all the nitty-gritty, right? And most of those details really are apropos of nothing. They're not load-bearing details. But in the Bible, every detail is load-bearing. And they're not likely to tell you how somebody looked or how long a thing had been going on or give you some other historical detail unless that detail matters. And there's a lot of commentary about why that number is so important to this story. And I'll get to that in a minute, but there's another really important detail here that's not mentioned twice, but 4 times. And that is, what day of the week was it that this took place? The Sabbath, the 7th day. So I said it was brought to you by the number 7 and the number 18. Here's the number 7. And I think we all know about the Sabbath. And we know what a big deal it was, especially in First and Second Temple Judaism and in Judaism today. The Sabbath being the seventh day, what we would now call Saturday, although in some languages it's called Sábado, is actually called Sabbath in Spanish, for instance. And it's also in the Ten Commandments. Honor the Sabbath day, keep it holy. Now, there's different schools of thought about how we as Christians should approach the Ten Commandments, but I feel like we should at the very least take this seriously, that there is this whole day in the week that is intended for honoring God, but which day? How many grew up hearing Sunday referred to as the Sabbath? Quite a few, right? So we have Sunday as the Sabbath, or we have, if you're a Seventh-day Adventist, Saturday is the Sabbath, or obviously if you're Jewish, Saturday is the Sabbath. And we gain the whole concept of Sabbath from Judaism, right? So why did we change it? And some people will say, well, it's because of the resurrection of Jesus happening on Sunday that the early Christians met on Sunday, that every service was a little Easter service. So they switched from the seventh day to the first day. And that's why we call it Sabbath now. I'm not sure if we should. And there's others who will say, well, no, Sunday is the Lord's day, and it's the day for Christian worship, but Saturday is still the Sabbath because it wasn't ours to change. And that's interesting. There's other people who will say they were both wrong because the Sabbath is no longer a day. Because if you recall where Jesus said, the Son of Man, referring to himself, is the Lord of the Sabbath. So some people will take it to say, well, Jesus' own teachings would say, hey, I've come to put all that away, and you don't have to observe a day anymore. Just observe me, just follow me. And that's a school of thought too. But I don't like any of those. Actually, they're all fine, and they'll make their separate points well. But I'm going to be honest with you, I feel like I ran into something new about the Sabbath just this last week as I was reading it, because you'll notice in the prophets and in the story of Israel in the Old Testament, you'll notice that the Sabbath is a really big deal. And it's like, if you break the Sabbath, you might be cast out of the camp, or you might be stoned, or all of these things. It's hardcore. And then you see the way that Judaism developed it with the Pharisees, and that you're only allowed to walk like a quarter of a mile or carry something as heavy as an egg, and you're not allowed to light a fire. And Sabbath becomes this legalistic thing that in order to honor God, you have to check all these little boxes. You have to follow all these little rules. Otherwise, you're dishonoring God. But being reminded of this prophecy in Isaiah 58, where Sabbath is a focal point, it set me on a different track. And if you have it, I encourage you to look back at it. In the middle, about 2/3 of the way down, it's making a promise to say, if you realign your hearts to me, then I have these promises for you. And one of those realignments is where God says through Isaiah, if you refrain from trampling the Sabbath. Well, the first thought in my mind is like, all right, fine, we should stop tending the crops on the Sabbath, or we should stop, lighting fires on the Sabbath, or doing work, because we're not supposed to do work. But Isaiah doesn't say, well, you picked up 2 eggs instead of 1, or you walked a half a mile instead of a quarter mile. What does he say? If you refrain from trampling on the Sabbath, from trampling the Sabbath, from pursuing your own interests on my holy day, if you call the Sabbath a delight and the holy day of the Lord honorable. And where does that passage start? He says, remove the yoke from among you, the pointing of the finger, the speaking of evil. If you offer your food to the hungry and satisfy the needs of the afflicted. In other words, not pursuing your own interests. And that set me on a different path. I'm like, wait a second. And in the Ten Commandments, it says, you shall do no regular work. Well, the regular work is to provide for me, to provide for my family, to look after my own interests. That's my regular work throughout the week. But then Isaiah clarifies, look, as if God was saying, I didn't say just sit down and do nothing. I said, stop looking after your own interests. Let the Sabbath day be a day of caring for others, of providing food to the hungry, and not only that, of being extra careful about how we might speak to one another, not speaking evil, being extra careful about making sure that everyone who's hungry is fed, looking not after our own interests. Doesn't that put Sabbath in a totally different light? And that's the argument that Jesus is making in this gospel. He is being called out by the Pharisees who don't want to see any of this work being done. And then one quick side point, you'll notice this is one of the few healings where they don't come to Jesus. Jesus picks her out of the crowd and says, come over here. It would almost give you the impression that it was a publicity stunt. Of course, it was a real healing coming from a place of real compassion from the Son of God. But I imagine Jesus looking over at the Pharisees and saying, like, all right, what's going to tick them off right now? It's the Sabbath day, and there's this lady over here that looks like she could use some help. I'm not going to look after my own interests. I'm going to look after the interests of someone else, and those people are going to come at me, and when they do, I'm going to be ready. Because I understand what the Sabbath is for. And that we take care of our animal. We don't ask babies, children to go hungry. We don't ask animals to starve or to be stuck in a ditch or whatever on the Sabbath. We do good. And that is what God set aside this time for, to break out of that normal pattern. And so in doing this, he picks out this lady who'd been bent over for 18 long years. And I have to say that moment resonated with me as well, but kind of in the opposite way. Because I've actually, only a couple of you maybe know this so far, but I've been dealing with some pretty severe lower back pain over the past few months. And I feel like I'm the opposite. I can stand up straight, but even bowing over like that hurts. And I went to the ER yesterday morning because it got really, really bad. And I took an Uber here this morning because I'm on a new pain medication. I don't know how it's going to react, how I'm going to react with it. So far, so good. But that moment of being under the weight of that pain, of having to be in the hospital, only for a couple of hours, but still, you feel like, well, there's a wasted day. Or you think about the time that I think about the time that I've hurt up to this moment, and what are the things that I could have done or should have done but didn't. And what a waste. Pain is such a waste. And I know there's people in this room who can relate to that. And in this process, I've tried to absorb the wisdom of what pain truly is. That pain is not a waste of life. Pain is a messenger. Just like emotions are messengers. And that in this life, pain is inevitable. We need it. There are people who cannot feel pain, who it's an actual disorder, and it's a really dangerous way to live. In this life, there will be pain, and if we accept that pain for the message it's sending us, then we can be fulfilled in that. We can give thanks for it. I've heard it said that pain is inevitable, but suffering is optional. Let me say that again. Pain is inevitable. Suffering is optional. And it's all in how we choose to listen. Do we see it as a waste, or do we see it as a message? And in the message that we are receiving through the gospel this morning, I think Jesus is showing us something very important through that number 18. Because we imagine, what must it be like to be this lady for 18 years, been all the way over, and can't live a normal life? That's 18 years that are gone. But the message I hear in that pain is that 18 is life. She didn't stop living for those years. They're not thrown away. They're not garbage. That was 18 years of life. And I wonder if we can see it the same way. Anytime we look back on our life with regret, whether it's pain, whether it's physical pain, whether it's emotional pain, whether it's rejection, whether it's depression, all of these things that seem to drain the life out of us and to steal life from us, I think Jesus is sending in the opposite message to say, listen, let me show you what I can do through you, through that pain. Don't suffer. Listen. And that when we do, we come back to that promise that's in Isaiah that shows us what the ruins were for. He says, your ancient ruins will be rebuilt. They're not going to be abandoned. Your new city will be based on that old city. The ruins are teaching you something. They're showing you something. These columns over here will be a building. This foundation over here will be a plaza. The ruins are there for a reason. And I hope that we can receive that in our own life. When we look at our ruins, we look at the things that we did wrong, we look at the things that we carry around with us as regrets, and we can receive that promise that our ancient ruins will be rebuilt. We shall raise up the foundations of many generations. We shall be called the repairer of the breach, the restorer of streets to live in. Amen.